Good evening and welcome to Supporting a Healthy Lifestyle. We would like to start our program with a short word of prayer, and then we will get started with Dr. Wes Youngberg. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to discuss some issues related to our health. We are honored to have Dr. Youngberg here this evening to share his knowledge and experience of how we should be performing and acting to have a better lifestyle. We ask that you continue to bless all the individuals who helped put this program together. We now ask it for the blessings on this service. In the name of Jesus, we ask, amen.
Yeah, amen.
So I'm excited to have Dr. Youngberg. He is a Loma Linda graduate. He received his master's in nutrition and then a doctor of public health in preventative care. He has practiced in several different areas, including some missionary work over in Guam. He has generated a significant amount of experience, but ultimately he's come back to Southern California and he's practicing over in Temecula. He's still very, very busy. He's been involved in writing books and being engaged in presentations like this one. I know last year he did an excellent talk on Alzheimer's. If you were looking for that, it's on the It Is Written network. He's written several books, including Goodbye Diabetes, Hello Healthy, Memory Makeover. And one of the areas we're going to be talking about tonight, prevention of Alzheimer's and how to reverse cognitive decline. Now that's the one that got my attention because believe it or not, I think I'm going through some of that. But without more talking, I'm going to let Dr. Youngberg take the panel at this point and move forward.
Thank you, Dr. Finnison. I appreciate, I'm really impressed by the way that you actually were able to own up to say, hey, I'm going through a little bit of cognitive issues and I can learn something from this as well. And let me say, I'm with you. One of the reasons I'm so interested in this topic of how to prevent Alzheimer's and how to reverse cognitive decline is because I started noticing issues with my cognition almost 10 years ago. I just turned 60 earlier last month. And I started noticing things when I was under a lot more stress. For instance, this is a great way to start our discussion. Let me say that my goal in our discussion today, I'm not going to show any PowerPoint. I'm just going to talk to you. And so if you have questions, if you're watching and you're interested in these three key topics and how they interrelate, post a chat, a question, and we're going to be monitoring that. And we're going to have a fluid discussion here. So my agenda is your agenda, and it involves a healthy lifestyle, but from the perspective of how Alzheimer's, type 2 diabetes, and COVID-19 interrelate in a very, very significant way. And so I think you'll be very interested in this. And so if you have any questions with the issues of COVID-19, how to prevent and how to properly manage that, especially naturally, post a question on that. I'm going to be discussing that and giving pointers. If you have any question about how type 2 diabetes can be prevented, can be reversed, it literally can be reversed the majority of the time. I'm not saying that. I'm not just a researcher that has some idea about type 2 diabetes and what's possible. I have been treating diabetics for the last 30 years clinically. I know that the majority of people with diabetes can actually reverse their condition. And by the way, the main goal isn't to reverse the diabetes. The main goal is to get so healthy that it doesn't matter anymore. To get so healthy that you do not have the complications typically associated with diabetes. Those complications are huge. number one, that the first and most important complication right now that anybody with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes or type 1 diabetes or gestational diabetes should be seriously concerned about is how much it dramatically increases the risk of succumbing to COVID-19. If there was ever a chronic lifestyle-related condition that increases your risk to die, to get serious symptoms from COVID-19 and ultimately die from it, it's the typical risk factors for type 2 diabetes. And so that's why I'm so passionate about helping people not just manage it, not just play with it, not just to improve it a little bit so you don't need as much medicine, but let's do everything. Let's do everything that we can. Leave no stone unturned to try to reverse it. And even if you don't make it, even if you don't succeed in reversing it, but you try really hard, you improve your health so much that it almost really doesn't matter, because the complications that would otherwise come from diabetes aren't going to be there anywhere near at that level. And so the number one thing is COVID-19. Even those of us that are not diabetic, not even pre-diabetic, but have an underlying insulin resistance. By the way, let me suggest that's about 80 or higher than that percentage of the US population have the underlying metabolic resistance to insulin, which means that our pancreas has to make even more insulin to try to control blood sugars. The problem is the more insulin you make, the more you're going to store fat as energy. So you're going to gain weight. So the very protective mechanism to try to control diabetes and control blood sugars and prevent a full-blown diabetes is actually making you worse, is actually making you more susceptible to infections and more susceptible to COVID and so forth. So these are things that are all interrelated. Now, just in case you don't think this really applies to you, if you're over the age of 40, okay, if you're between the ages of 40 to 59, I just graduated from that class a couple of months ago. I used to say we, but now it's you youngsters, okay, actually have a risk of having prediabetes right now without knowing it, 1 out of 2. That's a 50% chance, likelihood that if you're between those ages of 40 to 59, that you're going to be pre-diabetic. In other words, if you're not pre-diabetic, you're probably in the minority group. If you're in now my group between 60 and 74, the statistics show in the US that you're already at least 2 out of 3 of us have a minimum of pre-diabetes. Okay, if you're 75 and older, okay, it'll be a while before I get there, but if you're 75 years of age or older, 3 out of 4 of you already have at least pre-diabetes. So in other words, if you don't have pre-diabetes, you're doing better than the vast majority of the American population. And I always tell my patients, assume you have pre-diabetes until proven otherwise. Now, so I already mentioned that pre-diabetes and diabetes are directly and strongly related on a causal relationship with promoting COVID-19. Okay, it's been said early on in the pandemic that it didn't necessarily increase your risk of getting infected. It just increased your risk of dying if you were infected. Well, I think the studies now are starting to change, and enough information is coming out showing that it actually increases your risk of being infected in the first place for reasons for the underlying reasons that led up to the diabetes or the pre-diabetes in the first place. So, and one of those is low vitamin D levels. And I know, Doctor, you wanted to talk about that today. So I actually have several studies that I want to share with you. I just printed them off this afternoon that address this issue and show us why diabetics, diabetics typically have a very low vitamin D level. In fact, for those of you that are maybe type 1 diabetics or have family members or colleagues that have type 1 diabetes, did you know that a study in Finland years ago, it basically looked at the entire population of Finland. Finland has the notoriety of having the highest rates of autoimmune type 1 diabetes in the world. And so they did a national study where they looked at vitamin D intake during pregnancy and during the first 10 years of life, from being born, so every day from being born up until age 10. And what they found is that babies, infants, and children who were supplemented with vitamin D had an 80 to 90% prevention against type 1 diabetes. In the country that has the highest prevalence of this autoimmune condition that leads to type 1 diabetes. So, in other words, 9 out of 10 type 1 diabetics would have erased their risk for developing it if they had been getting that a certain level, at least 1,200 units of vitamin D, up to 2,000 units of vitamin D daily during infancy and early childhood. So I tell you that story because and we know that this is also true for type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is strongly related to vitamin D deficiency. Okay, and so just optimizing vitamin D levels is, if I get one message across, optimizing vitamin D levels by itself as a single therapy. I'm a lifestyle medicine doc, which means I'm always saying, it's never enough. We want to add strategy upon strategy upon strategy so we can finally get you to that tipping point where you heal, right? Where you get better. So that's what I do clinically with my patients every day. But vitamin D optimization is one strategy that has been shown to be effective, safe, and super effective all by itself in Alzheimer's, in COVID-19, and in type 2 diabetes. Okay, of course, many other conditions as well. Right. We're talking about those three right now.
And if I could break in for just a second, Dr. Youngberg, some people may not understand pre-diabetes and diabetes and how they might actually know that they're pre-diabetic or those types of things. So you can spend just a few minutes on that just so that people are clear.
Great question. Thank you. That's very important because you see, the pre-diabetic condition is actually the most important and most common risk factor that's driving progression of cognitive decline, progression of dementia of all kinds, including the main one that is Alzheimer's. So back to your question. Pre-diabetes and diabetes is defined by one thing alone, and that is how high your blood sugars are. So prior to 1997, there was no such thing as pre-diabetes. In fact, doctors, one of my good friends, who's the director of the Diabetes Treatment Center, Loma Linda University, for decades, he used to say, you can't be just a little bit pregnant, right? You heard that, right? And so, I remember, he says, well, this is a little bit different than that, but that was kind of the mantra back then. You can't be a little bit pregnant. Either you have diabetes or you don't have diabetes. And of course, now we know that was a very unfortunate perspective, because a lot of people ended up after their physical every year thinking, well, I don't have diabetes because I haven't crossed that line yet. Yeah, but up until 1997, you'll appreciate this, Doc. If your blood sugars, if your fasting blood glucose, fasting blood sugar was 139,
oh wow, you
didn't have diabetes. Because to be officially diagnosed with diabetes, your fasting blood glucose had to be 140 or higher. Now, that's not true anymore. In 1997, researchers got together medical experts and researchers all over the world got together and said, we got to change the diagnostic criteria. Why? Because we were finding patients that even before they got diagnosed with diabetes, and you know this, right? As a surgeon, right? That they actually had complications of diabetes even before they got diagnosed. Okay, so how crazy is that? How can you prevent the problem? Okay, even tertiary prevention, if by the time you diagnose a person, they already have major complications that require amputations or major nerve damage or kidney dialysis or blindness or etc., heart attacks, strokes. All of these are the kidney failure, right? All these are major complications of poorly controlled diabetes. So in 1997, they changed the criteria to a fasting blood sugar of 126 or higher. And the reason for that is because when they looked at the rate of complications, the polyopathies, the pathologies of diabetes, the complication rate started to exponentially rise after the fasting blood sugar hit 126. Okay, so that, I mean, that's a good reason to lower the diagnostic criteria, make it more, in other words, a lot more people were starting to get diagnosed after 1997. That same year, they also added a new category, pre-diabetes, and that is a blood glucose, a blood sugar of 100 up to 125. So if your blood sugars are anywhere between 100 and 125 in the morning before breakfast, you officially have pre-diabetes. Okay, now ideally you want to have two measures that document that just in case you have an erroneous reading, right? It's good to verify the diagnosis. But as I pointed out earlier, if you do those tests, the vast majority of adults have pre-diabetes. And I've been saying all along, it's getting better and better year by year, that about 90% of individuals in the United States who have pre-diabetes have absolutely no clue that they have it. Okay, so those would, now there's another even more important criteria, doctor, that I think our listeners should be aware of, and that is the fasting blood sugars is not the best indicator. There's another indicator that's also not the best indicator, and that's the hemoglobin A1c. Now, as a surgeon, you would use that to determine overall balance of blood sugars for the last 120 days or so. The hemoglobin A1c is a measure of caramelization, a measure of glycation or glazing of sugar to the proteins throughout the body. In this case, we're measuring how much of the hemoglobin in the red blood cells are coated or glazed or caramelized with sugar. And so it's a test that all surgeons and anybody doing a procedure, even a dental procedure, even pulling out a infected tooth, any type of procedure, when your hemoglobin A1c is running really high, it risks complications after surgery. So that's why, you know, the doctors are always saying, hey, get your blood sugars under better control, then you can have your surgery. Right. So the hemoglobin A1c criteria is for diabetes is a 6.5% or higher. So if you have a hemoglobin A1c, which anybody can get tested at any time, it can be done random without a fasting blood test. If it's 6.5 or higher, you have type 2 diabetes. End of story. Okay. Now, the reason that's end of story is because that test is actually the least sensitive of all the diagnostic markers. So if you meet the criteria for that test, there's no question. No question. You have type 2 diabetes, right? So now for pre-diabetes, the cutoff is 5.7. Okay, so if your hemoglobin A1c hits 5.7 up to 6.4, you're in the realm, in the range of pre-diabetes, which is so common. Remember, if you're pre-diabetic, you're much more predisposed to COVID-19, both getting infected and, more importantly, succumbing to serious symptoms, to going into acute respiratory syndrome, and then also succumbing to death after that. So being a diabetic increases risk for all of that. So that's why I've been kind of on the warpath, telling people that there's things we can do about this.
Right.
So hold me to that, Doc. I want to talk about, there's a simple thing that we can do immediately after eating that can revolutionize your blood sugars and dramatically improve your immune system and protect you from cognitive decline day by day, meal by meal. So we'll talk about that next. Now, we're taught there's one other test that is by far the most sensitive and most effective way to catch prediabetes and diabetes and even pre-diabetes. That is the insulin resistance syndrome itself that underlies the whole problem, that drives Alzheimer's, that drives heart disease and cancer risk and immune impairment, therefore COVID-19. That underlying, which is basically you can measure by looking at insulin blood levels. How much insulin your own pancreas has to produce in order to try to control the blood sugars. So that test is called a glucose tolerance test. Now, I do in almost every patient, I do a 4-hour glucose tolerance test with a fasting 1 hour and 2 hour insulin draw during that 4-hour test. It's a hassle of a test. Even when I started practicing in late 1980s, I was kind of, a lot of docs, older docs would look at me and say, oh, that's an outmoded test. Nobody does that test anymore. Plus you're wasting your patient's time. Just do a hemoglobin A1c. Well, so I've been literally ordering that test on almost every patient for the last 30 years. Now, here's an interesting point. Just a year and a half ago, the City of Hope, which is known internationally as one of the most prominent cancer hospitals and research facilities in the world. They had previously been given a very large endowment to look at the relationship between diabetes and cancer. And so they had a huge endocrinology section to their hospital and research team. And I was so impressed because just recently, in the last year and a half, they came out with a study looking at the NHANES data, right, from the government census data, showing that if you rely on the hemoglobin A1c to determine whether or not you're diabetic or not right now, you're missing 72 or 73, I forget, is in the early to mid 70s of percentile was of all the patients that otherwise have diabetes but think they don't because they went by the A1c blood test. So what does that tell you? As a clinician, are we satisfied doing a test that misses almost 3/4 of the people who actually have the condition? What would we think of a doctor who promotes a test for COVID-19 that misses 3/4 of people who actually have it, says that you're negative when in fact you're actually positive? Now, that's kind of what we're doing with the way we handle diabetes right now, because it's frustrating because I know how to prevent COVID-19. Okay, and so social distancing and wearing a mask, all those things make sense, right? Even though there's actually no epidemiologic evidence to strongly support that, it makes sense to do that, right? I mean, it just makes sense. So we do it. But there's so much more evidence in the medical literature of how we can optimize the immune system to basically put on, we say in Christian circles, putting on the whole armor of God, right? I love that because that's what we got to do with COVID. We got to put on the whole armor, not just one thing, not just wearing masks, not just social distancing, but even more importantly, optimizing vitamin D, optimizing sleep, optimizing lifestyle, optimizing our diet. You know that eating sugar predisposes you to an infection immediately. And so if you get exposed to the virus, and you've just had a big thirsty gulp, right? You're like that virus is going like, yeah, this immune system has got nothing to protect itself. I can just walk right in. I can shut down the alarm system. That's literally what COVID-19 does, by the way. If it gets in initially, okay, nothing happens for like at least 4 or 5 days. Nothing happens. You don't notice anything. But during that time, it's replicating, it's building, it's marshaling its forces, it's getting ready to knock you out, basically. And the way it does that is it literally turns off your innate immune system. So the very surveillance system that God created into our body to protect us from these viruses has been turned off. So literally these viruses have come in and turned off the alarm system in our house so they can just ransack it. That's literally what they're doing to the body. They're just ransacking the body, and we can turn that alarm back on so that the immune system starts fighting that virus immediately, and there's ways to do that. Okay, so one way to do it is to just stay away from sugar. So if you're writing things down, that's a biggie. Sugar, I said earlier, I'm going to talk about what can you do to immediately start preventing cognitive decline, to decrease your risk for type 2 diabetes, or to help treat it properly, and to immediately lower your risk of COVID-19. Stop eating sugar. Stop drinking soda. Stop doing it's kind of obvious, but people need to hear it from health professionals, right? And there's just not enough of that's been happening, because when we consume sugar, it literally shuts down our immune system, which is exactly what COVID-19 wants. They want that window of opportunity so that they can replicate. And once they replicate, then if you don't have the other pieces of armor to protect you, you're sitting duck. And you're going to find yourself in the hospital, in the ICU, and potentially in the morgue, right? So all that, in my opinion, is 100% preventable. I'm really not afraid of COVID-19. I might get it. I think at some point we're all going to be exposed, right? This is a very infectious virus, but it's not that dangerous to people who have a strong immune system and know what to do about it. So knowledge is power. Okay, that's right. And that's what we're disseminating here. Okay, so those are the interrelationships. Now, so stay away from sugar. The second thing I mentioned earlier, that there's something that we can do immediately after eating.
Correct.
Okay, and of course, obviously, we want to eat the healthiest diet possible, which really boils down to eating lots of non-starchy vegetables. Okay, now I had a patient today that called and said, like, can we eat something else besides non-starchy vegetables? I go, of course. So like, how did you get that impression that I only wanted you to eat non-starchy? I tell that to people because we eat so little of non-starchy vegetables. These are the green vegetables, the colorful vegetables. These are the very foods, the colors, the pigments of these vegetables are the very chemical or phytochemical substances that turn our genes on and off. I'm not making an allegory here. This is actually how the body works. Those pigments, those colors are there to attract us. We eat them, and they literally turn the good genes on, the genes that boost our immune system, the genes that stimulate the production of BDNF, the brain-derived neurotrophic factor that releases this hormone-like substance in the brain that literally heals the brain like aloe vera in a sunburn. Okay, and that's literally how it works. So genes that turn on good things, you want those turned on. And how do we do that? We do that by healthy lifestyle behaviors, especially lots of green leafy vegetables, lots of colorful vegetables. Basically, I say we should have at least 5, preferably 9 servings of colorful vegetables, non-starchy vegetables every day. That's a lot, but there's no question that'll dramatically lower your problems with blood sugars, with diabetes. That will dramatically lower your risk of cognitive decline. In fact, we know that seniors, this is out of University of Chicago study, seniors who eat a bowl, a good-sized bowl of non-starchy, green or colorful vegetables every day have a cognitive function of people who are at least 5 years younger than them. They got an extra 5 years there. That's great. That's just one thing. So what is the other thing that we can do right after meals? Go for a light walk. Now that sounds almost too simple. It's kind of like, Naaman going to Elijah, and say, what do I do to get rid of this leprosy? And like, just go dip in the Jordan River. And he got upset. Like, come on, tell me to do something that I could write home and tell the king, I did this great thing. I climbed to the top of this mountain, found this rare herb and made a poultice out of it. And I was cured, right? No, he just had to dip in this dirty Jordan River, right? So go for a walk. Yeah, it's literally that simple. And this is one thing I learned over 30 years ago when I was working with diabetic patients, is that when you eat a meal, the most important time to check your blood sugar is not in the morning before breakfast, even though that's a good time to check as well. But the most important time to know what your blood sugars are, especially if you have diabetes, but even if you have pre-diabetes, is 1 or 2 hours after the beginning of your meal. Okay, if you've had diabetes for a long time, just go with 2 hours. That's a common time to check. 2 hours after the beginning of your meal. Why is that? Because checking your blood sugars before a meal doesn't tell you at all what's the best food to eat, right? And checking your blood sugars 2 hours after the meal puts you on notice. Wow, when I eat that, my blood sugars are really good. But when I eat this over here, woo, my blood sugar goes up an extra 100 points. I've had patients who've had diabetes for decades, never once checked their blood sugars after a meal. And as soon as they start checking it, they're like amazed at how high their blood sugars go. And of course, the single most important determining factor of what makes your average blood sugar, the hemoglobin A1c blood test, go up is how high your blood sugars go up after the meal. So if you can blunt that rise of blood sugar after every meal, you can have a dramatic drop in your hemoglobin A1c even in 3 to 4 weeks. Yeah, that's how quick. I kid you not. You can see a very dramatic drop in the hemoglobin A1c very quickly, meaning that your average blood sugars have come down a lot. So, well, why not exercise 2 hours after the meal, after you've relaxed a little bit and digested your food a little bit, and then go for the walk. Here's why. By the way, exercise at any time is good for you, right? But it's all about timing. If you exercise 2 hours after that meal, your blood sugar's already gone up. That blood sugar's already caramelized and glazed itself to the proteins, causing irreversible pathologic damage to those cells. Okay, now I always say, how do you reverse the irreversible? Well, God made us such that we're always remaking. We're always remaking ourselves. We're always creating new cells. We're breaking down old cells and creating new cells. That's how you can reverse the irreversible. Once a cell, a protein, has been glycosylated or caramelized, it's caramelized for the entire life of that cell. You can't undo that. You can't unglaze a donut, right? Once it's glazed, it's glazed. You're done. It's amalgamated, right? So what we got to do here is prevent that from happening in the first place, and walking after a meal does this. So let me just say this. This is maybe one of the most important things that I'm going to share with you. They're all important, right? But there's nothing that we need to leave out. This is all something available to all of us immediately. And that is, if we go walking after a meal, here's what I tell my patients. Check your blood sugars after a normal meal at either 1 or 2 hours after the beginning of that meal. Do that for like 2 or 3 days. breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So you get an idea of how high your blood sugars go normally after the meal. Okay, you're going to be freaked out by how high they might go. Even non-pre-diabetics have blood sugars sometimes that shoot up to 200 at 1 hour. I see it all the time. If fasting blood sugar is perfect, 2 hours blood sugar is perfect, but the 1 hour blood sugar is sky high, which means your insulin levels going sky high too. And that's really bad for your brain. Number one cause of progressive dementia. It's really bad for your immune system. Not so good for COVID-19. And of course, it's one of the things that promotes diabetes over time. So if you check your blood sugars for a couple of days, and then you eat the same food, whatever it is, just the same food, but in addition to that, you go for a walk. And what I would recommend if you're testing yourself, go for a walk that's at least 10, 15 minutes. But if you can do more, do more. Okay, so here's the formula. I've established in just 30 years of experience, you figure stuff out little by little, right? I've established that for every single minute that a diabetic individual goes walking after a given meal, they will, when they recheck their blood sugars, either at 1 or 2 hours, they will have dropped their blood sugars anywhere from 1 point to 3 points, depending on how high their blood sugars otherwise would have been. So let's just say, God forbid, you check your blood sugars 2 hours after your meal and you're running 300. You go like, oh my goodness, that's insanely high. Yeah, well, great. Going for a 30-minute walk immediately after you're done with the meal and then retesting yourself 2 hours after the beginning of the meal, you could have dropped 90, 100 points just because of that walk. And that's 90 to 100 points of blood sugar that otherwise would have caramelized your proteins in causing irreversible pathologic damage in your eyes, in your brain, in your arteries, in your kidneys, in your nerves. Everywhere blood goes, you're going to cause irreversible damage, right? And again, you can reverse that damage if you get on the right plan. So that's another key point that works across all conditions, especially Alzheimer's risk, especially COVID-19 risk, and of course diabetes risk.
A quick question, and this will be a little multifaceted. Well, I guess first we had a comment from one of the people who were viewing us, and they just wanted to get a little more clarity about how much vitamin D do you recommend for the average adult as far as specific units. That's one question. The second one's a little more complicated, and it goes back to what you were saying as far as the walking after a meal. Obviously, this pandemic has more of us at home than we would have normally have been. But let's kind of go pre-COVID and assume that most of the country is working and in and out, taking kids to piano lessons and soccer practice after 8 hours at work. Most of us as Americans, me included, don't sit down and have 2 or 3 or 4 meals, whatever your number is. So you would be in a place to kind of check that. You're grabbing a protein bar, you're eating at, one of those fast food places. I won't talk about them because I don't want to give them advertising. And you're moving all over the place. So from a practical standpoint, how do you talk to your patients about, okay, you got to work at 8:30, let's just say, for example, and you decide to have some kind of a mid-morning snack. You can't walk till noon, or, and I know that this is a little complicated, or do you believe in intermittent fasting where you say, okay, look, I don't want you to have anything until this time period where you can be more aggressive in checking your blood sugar?
Great questions. Well, first of all, I'm a big fan of what we call time-restricted eating, or a lot of us think of it as intermittent fasting. Basically, where you eat a good breakfast, a good lunch, and a good early evening meal, where you have about 5 hours of no food in between. Now, some people say, well, I'm diabetic, my blood sugars might get too low, and then I get, I'm at risk of having problems, right? Well, that's why we got to learn how to manage it. So there's a learning curve to this. We have to make good decisions, right? But generally speaking, most of us are going to do far better and be far healthier if we have a good breakfast and a good lunch. And then if somebody needs to lose a lot of weight, they can actually skip the evening meal. Now, if that's too difficult, and for some of us, that would be too difficult, and we feel lightheaded, we just don't feel well, go ahead and have a lighter early evening meal so that you don't have any food about 3 to 4 hours before going to bed. So those are the general rules. No food in between meals, no food after an early evening meal, and so that you have at least 12 hours of no calories overnight before breakfast. Okay, and that right there teaches your body to burn fat as fuel. Now, what's interesting about this, doctor, is that if your body learns how to use fat as energy more efficiently, that's really good for the brain, because as your body efficiently produces mild amounts of ketones. I'm not talking about eating a ketogenic diet the way it's popularly recommended. I'm talking about teaching the body how to use fat, which is turned into ketones. Mm-hmm. Ketones then become your backup energy source for your brain so that you're not blowing up, literally destroying memory cells every day. You know that the average person who has gradual cognitive decline is losing 1,000 memory cells a day from the hippocampus, the little portion of the brain that's responsible for taking short-term memory and converting it into lasting memory. Of course, other things that it does, but we can turn that around to actually building, not only protecting those 1,000 cells that we otherwise would have destroyed, but we can start growing new cells in their range of about 700-800 new cells a day. So this is a huge turnaround where you can actually increase the size of the hippocampus I've seen from 15th percentile to 85th percentile in a year, just by staying away from sugar, following all the strategies, and et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of blood sugar checks, though, I recommend, for people to check their blood sugars. It can seem like a hassle, but just get one of those little readers that reads within 4 seconds, and you can have it in a purse, or you can have it, one at work and one at home, so that you can easily check your blood sugars wherever you're at. And the easiest thing of all is most of my patients that are on an intensive program, I get them to just have their primary physician prescribe them a Freestyle Libre. This is one of these little tabs that you tape onto your shoulder, and it has a sensor, so you can scan your phone or another scanning device over it any time of the day or night, and it'll tell you exactly what your blood sugars are. So you don't have to stick your fingers at all. You can say, hey, what's your blood sugar? I'm at 85, or whoa, I'm at 250. I better, so when you know what your blood sugars are, it gives you instant feedback. It's basically a form of biofeedback that now helps you make better decisions. If you know that your blood sugars are dropping 100 points after a 30-minute walk, if you can carve out that time, you're going to try to carve out that time because man, that's huge, right? But I say, if you're busy, try to do 10 minutes. Do something. Get into the habit of doing even 5 minutes immediately after meals, and then little by little I go, I feel so much better when I even do 5 minutes. I want to do it longer. And so that's how we get hooked on healthy lifestyle behaviors. Now, you asked about vitamin D.
Yes.
So let me tell you what I do. I first became aware about vitamin D being an important issue when I was on the island of Guam. I was actually reading the local paper, the Pacific Daily News, and I was reading in the lifestyle section a little blurb about a Harvard-based professor who was doing research on vitamin D and its relationship with cancer. And I go, what? I'd never heard anything about this before. I'd been practicing for maybe 10 years at that point. I go, wow. So I carefully read the article, and this doctor said this. He was measuring he was measuring hundreds of people, thousands of people with their blood levels of vitamin D, and then comparing their risk for developing cancer. And he said this, he says, the power of vitamin D in your blood to prevent cancer is greater than the power of cigarette smoking to cause cancer. You know, I've been helping people stop smoking my whole life. I trained with Dr. Alvin Adams, who is a respected and worldwide known internist who worked for the National Institutes of Health and promoting smoking cessation. You know, so I'm certified to help people stop smoking. I'm nationally certified in another program. So when I read that, I go like, that sounds like quackery. That can't be true. But it was actually based on the same data sets that looked at smoking rates and cancer. Same data sets. And that's what got me. So I immediately started checking vitamin D in every single patient that I saw. On Guam, I mean, you would think Guam, you know, it's in the middle of the tropics. There can't be that much vitamin D deficiency. Almost every patient that I tested had vitamin D deficiency. Do you know that basically, even if you look at the most conservative diagnosis of vitamin D deficiency, that's a blood level of less than 20 nanograms per milliliter. That's actually a bad diagnosis. It should be less than 30. Okay, but if it's less than 20, over about half of Americans are vitamin D deficient. If it's less than 30, which is in my case still really bad, in my belief, the research says it, your risk is like 80% of the population. But do you know that amongst African Americans, doctor, 82% have levels of vitamin D that are less than 20. I say 70 to 100 is the goal in the blood. Okay, and over 80, 4 out of 5 African Americans have levels less than 20. That right there is one of the biggest reasons why there's such a big disparity with COVID-19 and with type 2 diabetes as well. So here's the good news, is that we can dramatically lower that risk. Now, here's the reality. Even though African Americans and Hispanics have a much higher rate of serious vitamin D deficiency, the reality is that we all do. We all have. When I check my vitamin D on the island of Guam, I would spend an hour every day walking the beach after lunch, because I was also doing lectures at night, and I had a low vitamin D. So do not believe, don't buy into the falsehood, and it is a falsehood, that if you spend time outside in the sun, your vitamin D level is going to be optimal. I rarely see that. Now, I'm a big believer in being out in the sun. Don't get me wrong, especially for COVID-19 risk, and for hormone balancing and for blood sugar optimization. Being out in the sun is a good thing as long as you do it properly. Okay, but that is not going to be enough to optimize your vitamin D in the vast majority of us, especially individuals like yourself, doctor, who are so good looking. You have this dark complexion. Now, I'm serious. I'm saying the darker your complexion, the more protection you have from ultraviolet radiation, right, which means you're not going to be producing vitamin D. It's going to take you 8 times more sunshine to produce vitamin D. Therefore, you need to supplement it far more than I would. But bottom line is, we all need to supplement, right? So let me tell you why. And I know we only have 10 minutes left. So let me jump into this. The government standards are woefully inadequate. Let me just say that. If you want to preempt COVID-19, if you want to prevent it, if you want to manage it, you can't follow just the government guidelines. They're good guidelines for a start. They're a great start, but they're nowhere near adequate to actually do what we're thinking it's going to do. Okay, so we have to clinically, what works. What I've learned in my practice, again, I've been checking vitamin D levels in every patient for well over 20 years. And so I have a good sense of this. Is I could count on just over 2 hands the number of patients that I've seen who did not need the supplement.
Okay.
I mean, all my patients, that it's just, it's almost guaranteed that they're going to need. So if there's one test that I would recommend that everybody get, even if you have to pay for it yourself. And you could don't go to the lab and then just pay for it, because then it'd be like $250. But you can get it for like $60 with a blood spot test through vitamindcouncil.org or organizations like that. So there's ways you can get it really cheap if you can't qualify. Medicare won't pay for it unless you have osteoporosis or known vitamin D deficiency, etc. So that's why I say get tested. Okay, so then you can be diagnosed with vitamin D deficiency, which you're almost guaranteed to have, and then Medicare will pay for it from there on out. Okay, so you can check it maybe twice a year to make sure you're optimal. So the average patient that I see needs about 5,000 units a day.
Okay.
Many need 10,000 units a day. Now, immediately, I have many of my physician friends will say, well, Wes, you're getting overboard on this. You know, you're going to go into hypervitaminosis and toxicosis. And I go like, no, time out. I've read the studies. You cannot tell me that 10,000 units of vitamin D is going to create toxicities in anywhere near even 1% of the population. 1% of the population. I take 10,000 a day, and I have for decades. So the average person needs at least 5,000. Now, Dr. Fauci, right? The COVID-19 doctor of America, he was asked just last week in an interview, how much vitamin D do you take? He said, yeah, I take vitamin D. I take vitamin C. Good for you, Dr. Fauci. Why would he do that? Because he wants to protect himself, right? I mean, we all should be doing that at minimum. And guess how much he takes? He takes 6,000 units a day. That's 150 micrograms a day. That would be considered to be excessive by government standards, but not by the number one government doctor. No, for COVID-19. No, obviously he doesn't think that's excessive. And that's very smart of him to do that. So let me just review real quickly a couple of the studies that just came out. Well, let me just summarize them. First of all, there are studies now that are showing that if you have low vitamin D levels, and if you're not supplementing vitamin D, it's like a 95% guarantee you're low in vitamin D, which means your risk of COVID-19, you're almost double the risk. Some studies say up to doubling the risk of getting infected, not just dying, but getting infected. So in other words, we can all get exposed, but exposure is not to be equated with having an infection that is diagnosable, right? So it takes a lot more of the virus, a much higher exposure or dose of the virus to infect and cause a disease in somebody who's protected. A lot more. So that's the first thing we do is optimize. So once you get into the hospital with COVID symptoms, okay, the people who have the most severe COVID symptoms are the ones with the lowest vitamin D. And the ones with the lowest vitamin D are the ones who have the most severe symptoms, who then go on to develop acute respiratory distress syndrome. There was actually a belief 6 months ago that vitamin D might actually increase the risk of acute respiratory distress syndrome. That was the most ridiculous notion in the world. All the research said otherwise. But there was some people saying, no, don't do it because you might make things worse. So, well, we need to follow evidence. And vitamin D dramatically calms an excessive immunologic inflammatory response. Dramatically, so much so that if you have enough vitamin D on your system, your likelihood of having an acute inflammatory reaction goes way, way, way down. So make sure, get tested. But, if you're not going to get tested within the next week, just start taking vitamin D. Don't wait around. It's one of the most important ways to protect yourself from getting infected, from getting hospitalized, from getting admitted into the ICU, and from dying. So here's the biggest study that just came out. And this should be, this should be the final evidence that somebody would need, doctor or layperson, to optimize vitamin D levels in your blood starting right now. They basically did a randomized blinded study on people that were coming into the hospital that had significant COVID symptoms. Okay. And so they were being admitted to the hospital. And so they asked the question, we're gonna give everybody in the study all the standard of care that we have developed up until now. You know, all the medicine, whatever needs to be given, we will give it. Okay. And so everybody gets the same thing. The only difference will be that at the day of diagnosis, they would get like 24,000 units of vitamin D, something like that, which is actually less than I would recommend to anybody with symptoms. If somebody has symptoms, they should be doing 50,000 units daily at least for the next 5 days, and then back off from there. Well, but this is what the study did, about 20-some thousand units at diagnosis. And then 3 days later, they got another 12,000 units. And then 3 days later, they got some more. So they got a good dose, but it wasn't that much. It was nowhere near a dose that would be considered even anywhere near too excessive. You know what the results were of that study? This blows me away. It just came out just less than 2 weeks ago. They found that those who were in the control group, in other words, they got all the care possible, but they did not get randomized to the vitamin D exposure, they went on to get admitted to ICU at a 50% rate. In other words, 1 out of 2 of them eventually got admitted to ICU because they had progressed to acute respiratory distress syndrome. 20% of them, or 10% of that entire control group, went on to die. Do you know what the results were with the vitamin D group? Just getting a little bit, and I would consider that a little bit of vitamin D from a clinical standpoint. Only 2% went on to ICU. Now, doctor, you know, I mean, that's in research, we rarely see anything close to this. This is a 25-fold differential. In other words, your risk of getting admitted to ICU without getting vitamin D at admission is 25 times higher. That's 2,500% higher than those who got the vitamin D. Which group do you want to be in? Yeah, I mean, this is a hospitalized, randomized study, and so, and then actually none of them died. So you can't even it was a infinite improvement in mortality.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that right there should just, you know, be the final nail in the coffin of should I supplement vitamin D or not?
Okay.
Don't listen to anybody who says that you can get toxic from it. Let me tell you this study. In my book, Hello Healthy, I write about this. There's never been a death due to vitamin D toxicosis. Never, not once. And that included a man who was feeling really tired and was feeling all rigid, like he was getting rigor mortis. I mean, he's like, what is wrong with me? So he goes to the ER, and the ER doc is like, man, what's wrong with this guy? Does he have tetanus? So he was doing, he went to his supercomputers figuring out, what putting in all the symptoms to figure out what do I do next? What's the next test? Well, eventually, hours and hours later, one of the tests that popped up on his computer screen was vitamin D toxicity. So he checked the vitamin D level. Now, our vitamin D levels, the normal reference range for vitamin D in the blood is 30 to 100 nanograms per milliliter. That's the normal range. And so I want you to be in the upper third of that normal range, 70 to 100. Remember that, because most doctors will say if you're 32, oh, you're good. No, you're not. You're nowhere near optimal, not in COVID era. That's like saying, somebody's shooting at you and say, well, go ahead. If you run fast enough, they'll probably miss you. Like, what? That's ridiculous. Anyway, so this gentleman, the ER doctor was very astute, and he figured out he figured out that this guy was taking a vitamin supplement, a powder supplement that had been mixed in somebody's garage. You know, it wasn't a reputable supplement, and they had accidentally put in so much vitamin D that he was getting over 1 million units of vitamin D a day for 7 months, or it's actually longer than that. And you know what his blood levels of vitamin D were? 750 in that range. And you know what the treatment was? He didn't die. The doctor says, stop taking that supplement that was mixed improperly, and his vitamin D levels went right back down to normal over time. You know, case solved. So you're more likely to die from water intoxication from drinking too much water than taking too much vitamin D. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, I'm serious. There's all kinds of people that have drunk themselves to death by just with water because of electrolyte imbalances, right? But you just, you know, if you're making any sense at all with vitamin D, if you're listening to what we suggested, then you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. So anyways, we're done with that. We've covered, these are areas that interrelate. Okay, and if you want more information on the Alzheimer's, this is the book, Memory Makeover: How to Prevent Alzheimer's and Reverse Cognitive Decline the Natural Way. I wrote it to give people hope. By the way, the same things that protects us from COVID are the same things that protects us from diabetes, the same things that protects us from cognitive decline.
Okay, so just to summarize, we need more vitamin D. Stay away from sugars, if at all possible, processed sugars especially. Try and walk for 15 to 30 minutes after each meal, and eat obviously a healthy diet. Pretty well, you know, breakfast, wait 4 or 5 hours, a noon meal, and then an early evening meal with about a 12-hour fasting in between. I know I'm kind of condensing a lot in 2 seconds.
You're doing a good job.
And then we need about 5,000 units of vitamin D, international units, vitamin D a day. I think that was one.
Yeah, and we can optimize that by testing your blood levels, and then we adjust then.
Okay. So thank you very much. This was incredible. I've gotten a few other comments that have come on board. But I didn't want to stop you because the information was so excellent. Thank you for your time and efforts. And for all of those of you watching online, this again has been the Kansas Avenue Seventh-day Adventist supporting a healthy lifestyle seminar. We look forward to seeing you again in a month. Take care, good evening, and God bless you.
Thank you for having me. Great to be with you.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.